Hey everyone, here's a like and dislike about every DBD chapter. The Last Breath was the first chapter for DBD. My like would simply be Nia. I think for the game's first ever new survivor, she was very well realized and has a really cohesive grouping of perks that represent her well. My dislike about it has got to be the nurse, but more specifically her balance and how since her release she's basically always been the best the game has to offer. In some ways it's nice to have that benchmark, but at a point it would be nice for there to be a new top killer. It's been almost 9 years. Halloween was the first ever licensed chapter, and so my like is simply how it paved the way, and did so due to its incredible faithfulness to Halloween itself, bringing along Myers and Laurie incredibly well. My dislike has got to be how Haddonfield was brought along though. If Myers and Laurie are great adaptations, Haddonfield, especially its original iteration, certainly wasn't. Of Flesh and Mud, I want to pose my like and dislike around its two mechanics it introduced, hexes and luck. Hexes were incredibly positive for the game, introducing totems, which are essentially a secondary objective, as well as a new perk type entirely. Luck, on the other hand, has been an almost useless mechanic from launch to current day, simply providing an increased chance to unhook yourself when taking an attempt. One incredibly impactful, and one doing barely anything 9 years later. Left Behind. I really like how fitting Bill's perks are. They gave him a really appropriate set of perks and perfectly present Bill as a character. The dislike would be maybe the lack of cosmetics we've gotten. He's sort of a staple character at this point, so it would be nice to get some more. Spark of Madness. This chapter's greatest success in my eyes is its well-crafted characters. Both Doctor and Fung have become incredibly well-loved and deservedly so. Our resident esports gamer and sadistic maniac. The dislike would be Doctor's perks. Despite his craziness, they're quite boring, especially now with Monitor and Abuse not offering much original after its FOV effect was removed. A Lullaby for the Dark. Huntress is an incredibly well-made character gameplay-wise, despite her simplicity. She's one of the few very simple characters who I feel really don't need anything new added to them. She's just great and she always has been. My dislike is probably Mother's Dwelling as a map. It's got a great atmosphere, but it's still really big, kind of confusing, and not very balanced. Leatherface. I appreciate greatly how much they've done over the years to bring this chapter up to a great standard. From its bare bones release to now, it's really a night and day. Sure, it should have released this way in the first place, but regardless, I think it should be complimented. My dislike would be the lack of other content actually, which isn't a complaint I'll be using for most of the single character chapters by the way. Just this one in particular, down to its iconicity, I think could have had more. Particularly the family house and possibly Sally Hardesty. A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'll start with the dislike. It's a shame this chapter has not been able to add more, and has always been a bit problematic throughout its entire history, whether it's Freddy, Springwood, or Quentin's face. My like for it is that despite it typically getting a lot of hate, I do think it has a lot of elements to be praised, such as the recreation of Badham, and many visual parts of Freddy's power, like the Dreamworld. There's really cool elements in there too. Saw. This is a chapter where I find myself appreciating the licensed lore a lot. Usually licensed lore ends up being very simplistic and kind of dull, but for Saw it's actually really well balanced and does the typical story recap, but also provides new information and insight. My dislike would be maybe the perks of both of this chapter's characters. They all feel pretty forgotten honestly, which is a shame. Curtain Cool. I want to praise for its clown depiction. I'm someone who really doesn't find clowns scary, yet DBD's clown actually sort of does something for me, so I think high praise there. He's just disgusting. My dislike is maybe Father Campbell's Chapel as a map. Before the Realm Beyond rework, ages ago now, this map used to be a lot better I think. I sort of missed that version. Shattered Bloodline. My dislike off the bat would be Adam's lack of tome lore. He's a character that whilst has a cool setup, he is in dire need of extra lore. I think as he does edge on boring a bit. My like would be, you know what, the perks I really enjoy about this chapter? Atoms are really dynamic and interesting, and spirits offer something pretty unique, like with Haunted Ground. Darkness Among Us. This chapter has great characters. I love Jeff and Legion, and I love their interconnectedness too with Ormond. The visual world building within Ormond, painting these connections is great also. My dislike would be the imbalance of how post-launch the characters got attention. Legion have had their tomes, tons of cosmetics, a whole comic series, yet Jeff has gotten basically nothing, despite him also being a really great character. Demise of the Faithful. I like how unique this chapter is. It pairs up a Babylonian priestess with a vomiting power with a late night talk show host, yet it connects them with really interesting themes. I love that. My dislike would be honestly tough. Maybe Jane's two forgotten perks, Poised and Solidarity. These two have been useless for so long now. Ash vs Evil Dead. I'll start with the negative for this one. I honestly just think that Ash could use a bit of a visual update. He looks a bit blurry. The like is, well, we got Bruce Campbell's voice, not just for Ash, but for Ashy Slashy, and even more lines for a tome. That's crazy. Ghostface. I dislike currently for his weakness. He could really use, or stealth killers in general, a substantial buff. He's far too weak despite how much people love him too. My like is that he has such well-crafted stealth gameplay. You really feel sneaky with him. This is a tough thing to balance though, is stealth and strength. They are tough to have hand in hand. Stranger Things. I like this chapter a lot due to it being the catalyst for the game modernizing itself, seemingly. Around this release we saw a ton of quality of life changes, lore being brought to the forefront, and a graphical improvement overall. The colossal nature of this was also reflected in the chapter itself. My dislike would come in the form of how unfortunate it is, I suppose, that despite this we've had barely anything since its release added to this chapter. Cursed Legacy. This chapter introduced some really fun gameplay for both sides, with Yui's heavy counter perks like Any Means Necessary, and Oni's speedy and strong power. My dislike would be Oni's add-ons, pretty much all boring. Chains of Hate. My dislike for this chapter, similar to Cursed Legacy, is the Killer's add-ons. My like would be Slinger's gameplay, and specifically how they managed to make a gun work, which is something in theory that sounds quite hard to implement well. Silent Hill. My dislike is going to be, again, add-ons. This year was incredible for content, but the add-ons were pretty awful, I think. My like is the insane care and love that was poured into this chapter. I actually think Midwich is the standout for this, having so much detail, secrets, and flair in design. Descent Beyond. Blight is a very well realized and handled character, I think. He's one of the centers of DBD's lore, and through gameplay as well, he's really important too, and a key fixture. Felix is sort of the flip side of this, being really interesting upon release, then sort of getting lost over time, with his character presentation feeling quite inconsistent. A Binding of Kin. My dislike for this chapter is almost the missed potential of it. My like of it is how awesome this chapter really is. Twins have an incredibly novel power, and Elodie was a really cool Survivor edition, with a completely new and really interesting lore plotline. Going back to my dislike though, it's how everything was handled regarding this chapter after its launch. So much cool stuff, but so much of it left in the dust, from Twins' power to Elodie's storyline. In part though, I do think the reception of this chapter is to blame. Why pursue these things when the vast majority of players received them poorly? All Kill. Trickster's power has got to be the negative for me here. Whilst I think it has its moments, it's one of those powers that can be both incredibly satisfying to play or incredibly infuriating, and it's sort of the same to face too. It's an inconsistent power. The positive is the entire aesthetic and marketing of this chapter being simply incredible. Absolute banger theme music, amazing visuals, and a really fresh take on a killer and survivor. Trickster was so wildly different when he released compared to everyone else, and Yunjin was really cool too, as a much more morally complex survivor also. Resident Evil. My like for this chapter is how game-changing it was, not only in the literal sense of player numbers, but also with its introduction of limited item perks, AI zombies, and simply being a bigger chapter than ever. RE really felt like a positive turning point in the game. My dislike would be a sort of retrospective dislike of RPD. The original version was far too large, caused crashing on consoles, and was quite unplayable for some characters. Hellraiser. This has got to be praised for how incredibly well presented Pinhead is. He's a character who would seem difficult to put in the game, but they nailed it. Visuals, power, voice lines, all amazing. The downside has got to be the fact that this license is gone, and probably never coming back. Hour of the Witch. This is another chapter I have a hand-in-hand positive and negative. Boons were both a blessing and a curse. They provided a really unique new type of survivor gameplay, but equally they were balanced seemingly around circle mainly, and because of that it feels like they've fizzled out over the years. Portrait of a Murder. I like that they tried something new here and took a few risks. Artist is a really weird but cool character. Jone is obviously a much more morally grey survivor, and Eerie is very bright and just quite unlike your usual realm. My dislike would be how it sort of feels like the content of this chapter has fallen to the wayside a lot. Artist and Jone rarely get much attention in patch notes or cosmetics, respectively, and Eerie feels like it takes the most attention, but mainly because people dislike it. Sadako Rising. I like how Yuichi was handled in this chapter. Similar to Ghostface, he's sort of a half original, half licensed creation. His lore is also really great. I really enjoy when we get these cool sort of 50-50 chapters. My dislike comes down to Sadako's power. It's been changed so much over the years, yet it also feels quite restrictive despite this, with Condemned railroading you quite a lot in terms of what you can do. Roots of Dread. Garden of Joy is my dislike for this one still. I think. It's such a cool map conceptually, which is why I dislike it, because it's all the more annoying that the gameplay is awful. My like would be the classic horror-heavy focus of this chapter, Dredge being this horrific abomination, and Hattie being this complex and haunted survivor, and the garden being one of the creepier realms they've made. Resident Evil Project W. My like would be the characters of this chapter and how well they were transferred over. They all look really faithful, and Wesker especially is so well done with his voice lines, power, and everything. My dislike is really specific, but it's Ada's lore and how it seemed to be set in RE4, yet she looks like she's been taken from RE2. That's just a bit bothersome. Forged in Fog. My like would be the entire theme of this chapter, honestly. I really love how Night looks. Vittoria was a really fresh survivor who was so different to almost every other one, and I always love when we get a survivor-killer interconnected story. My dislike has to be for the Borgo. It's one of the newer realms that I've just never been a fan of. It feels far too flat and there's lots of parts that feel quite dead. The color scheme of course has gone through a number of changes. It's more pleasant nowadays, but I'm still not the biggest fan. Also, why is the castle outside the map? That should have been the map. Tools of Torment. I appreciate this chapter greatly for introducing the idea of reusing maps for new chapters. This chapter reintroduced Shelter Woods, only this time featuring Skull Merchant's base of operations, where before it was an empty forest. My dislike has got to simply be the lack of direction when it came to Skull Merchant's power. This is far and above the issue with this chapter at its core. Skull Merchant was confusing and directionless. End Transmission. I like this chapter's existence as a whole. Finally receiving an original sci-fi chapter was amazing, and I've always loved how they executed it with Hux, Gabriel, and Devarka. It all fits nicely, and I think they explored the concept well, with an AI robot, a clone, and a very alien-looking planet. My dislike would be Gabriel, beyond his being a clone. That is not very interesting. That's the most interesting thing about him. He's really boring otherwise. Nicolas Cage. My like is the fun of this chapter, incredibly fun perks and voice lines, and just crazy that Nicolas Cage, the guy, is in DBD. My dislike would maybe be that his visuals are a bit lacking in detail, not sure if that's just me though. Alien. This is a really beautiful chapter. Xenomorph has amazing visuals, great animations, and a visually flashy power. Nostromo and Ripley both do look great too, but are the weaker part of this chapter. For Ripley, it's a shame there's no likeness to Sigourney Weaver. Nostromo, it's just far too big, I think, and it feels like the actual Nostromo is the lesser important part of the map, which is odd. Chucky. Chucky I will always like for his literal new perspective on the game and the killer side. His third-person view of the trials provides such unique gameplay, and I find it impressive still how they implemented him. My dislike is how his power balancing has played out, where he's been tossed around the tier list a lot, when I don't think he was ever that strong. Alan Wake. This half chapter can be highly praised for its awesome voice acting by Matthew Peretta. It really feels like this is a guy experiencing the realm. It's also really difficult to find a dislike for this because the lore is great, visuals, perks, sort of everything. Deadline is maybe a bit of a pointless perk. All things wicked. My like for this chapter is its revival of my love for the game, in part, but also for its incredible characters, marketing, visuals, sounds. It's really hard to find a negative. I know some people don't like Sable's overly characterized lore, but I honestly do. The one thing I don't like is how they slotted Sable into Michaela's story retroactively. It feels really odd that Michaela never mentions Sable now in her lore, so I'm not so much a fan of that part, but I do like her lore still overall. Dungeons and Dragons. This is a case where it just has to be the split of characters. Vecna was incredibly done, I think, all things considered. He has a lot of detail, a cool power, and new mechanics with the chests. The bards, on the other hand, feel like unrealized potential. Aestri the elf is kind of cool, but people barely even remember Bearmar, the human. Tomb Raider. This is a hard chapter to find a negative for, honestly. I think they nailed Lara's visuals, and she has really good fitting perks too. I would say the one thing that's a shame is the lack of her original look as a cosmetic, but even then this is being changed very soon. But hey, that's the best I've got. Castlevania. This chapter is stunning visually and has lots of cool secrets and details, but I do find it a bit of an empty chapter, not all too dissimilar to Alien. It's a visually stunning chapter and so well translated from its source material, but something feels a little empty about it, especially Dracula's power. Doomed Course. My dislike is the launch and sort of lack of marketing for this chapter, because it's a really great chapter. I can't help but feel like it was sort of twinsed though. My like would honestly be the whole chapter. Tori and Houndmaster are great characters, Houndmaster's power is really fun, and maybe their perks are sort of mid, but the chapter as a whole is a hit. Tokyo Ghoul. This is a chapter I surprised myself by liking, because I had no interest in it originally, and my hopes were super low upon its announcement. However, I was very pleasantly surprised. Kaneki is a really interesting character, and I do love how he was integrated into the realm. I also find his power really enjoyable. My dislike would maybe just be his excessive screaming and moaning in the lobby. It gets kinda crazy at times. Steady Pulse, or Arella Rose basically. This was a chapter with a number of really cool teasers which we hadn't seen in quite a while, all of them leading up to Arella and her arrival to the realm, which made it all the more exciting. I really love how this chapter was marketed. I do think this could have been a full chapter instead though, especially as a haunted house map would have been so cool. So my dislike is sort of that it's not a full chapter, I guess. Five Nights at Freddy's. This is a tough one to find a dislike for, honestly. The closest one I have is probably the perks being not too interesting. My like would be the add-ons actually. I love how unique all of Springtrap's add-ons are, and how they provide you with so many unique playstyles. Well, I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you like and dislike about every chapter too down below. Thanks and goodbye.